The last thing my father said before he drove away was, "Let's see if she can handle it." He was laughing when he said it. My brother thought it was hilarious. My mother was looking at her phone. The car was a silver Suburban, packed with camping gear and snacks and 4 people who had decided, somewhere between the trailhead parking lot and the 2-lane mountain road outside Estes Park, Colorado, that leaving me behind was funny. I was 17 years old. I had $43 in my pocket. My phone had no signal. The nearest town was 11 miles down a mountain road I had never walked. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and the temperature at that elevation drops fast after sunset. I watched the taillights of our car disappear around a curve. I stood on the gravel shoulder for a long moment. The wind moved through the pine trees above me with a sound like breathing. A truck passed going the other direction, slowing slightly, then continuing on. I picked up my backpack. I started walking. That was 15 years ago. I have not spoken to my family since. Not because I could not find them. Because I decided, somewhere on that 11-mile walk in the fading Colorado light, that the people who thought leaving me on a mountain road was a joke were not people I needed to find my way back to. I found my way to everything else instead. My name is Nadia Reeves. I am 32 years old. I run a wilderness therapy program for at-risk youth in Asheville, North Carolina, which I founded 6 years ago and which currently serves 43 young people per year in partnership with 3 county social services departments and 1 federal grant. I tell you what I do before I tell you where I came from because what I do is inseparable from what happened to me. You will understand that by the end. I grew up in suburban Denver, the only daughter in a family of 4. My father, Dennis, was a sales manager for a medical equipment company, loud and confident and the kind of man who filled rooms with his energy and expected the people around him to organize themselves accordingly. My mother, Patricia, was a dental hygienist who had spent 22 years making herself smaller to fit beside my father and had become, through that long accommodation, genuinely small. My brother, Curtis, was 3 years older than me and had inherited my father's confidence without any of the competence that might have made it warranted. I was the quiet one, the reader, the one who got good grades without making noise about it and who noticed things other people did not notice and who had learned, by the time I was 12, that the safest way to exist in my family was to take up as little space as possible. My father called this being mousy. He said it like it was a character flaw. He said it often enough that I began to understand it was not an observation but a verdict. Curtis called me other things, the way older brothers do when there are no consequences for it. My mother witnessed this and said nothing, which was her primary contribution to my childhood. I want to be fair to the complexity of it. There were good moments. There were camping trips that were genuinely fun in the early years, before the dynamic had fully calcified. There was a period when I was 10 or 11 where my father and I had something that felt like a real connection, built around a shared interest in hiking and maps and the specific pleasure of knowing where you are in physical space. He taught me how to read a topographic map. He taught me how to navigate by landmarks. He taught me, without knowing he was teaching me, exactly the skills I would need on a mountain road at 17. The cruelty was not always dramatic. It was mostly ambient. The way my father spoke about my grades, sufficient, he would say, with the tone of someone describing something barely adequate, versus the way he spoke about Curtis's, which were lower but delivered with enthusiasm. The way family photographs were organized, with me consistently at the edge, not through deliberate arrangement but through the unconscious physics of a family that had decided, without discussion, who its center was. The way my mother laughed at my father's jokes about my quietness, my smallness, my mousy quality, as though she were laughing with him rather than at me, a distinction that requires the person being laughed at to believe it. I stopped believing it somewhere around 15. I started planning around 16. I was going to leave for college, for real college, far enough that visits would require flights. I had my eye on an environmental science program at a school in Vermont that had offered me a partial scholarship based on an essay I had submitted through a program at my high school. I had not told my family about the scholarship or the school. I had learned to keep the things that mattered to me somewhere they could not reach. The summer trip was Curtis's idea. A week in Rocky Mountain National Park, camping and hiking, a family tradition we had done every year since I was 8. I had come because not coming would have required an explanation I did not want to have, and because some part of me, the 17-year-old part that had not yet fully accepted what the adult part already knew, still believed that trips like this could be what they had been when I was 10. I was wrong about that. It happened on day 4. We had done a long trail that morning, 11 miles round trip to a lake above the tree line. I had hiked faster than the rest of them, which I always did, and had waited at the trailhead for 40 minutes while they came down. My father was irritated by this in the way he was irritated by anything that suggested I was more capable than the narrative required. On the drive back to the campsite, something started. I do not not remember exactly how. A comment from Curtis about my attitude, my father's agreement, my mother's silence, the compressed atmosphere of 4 people in a car after a long day, when 3 of them have decided the 4th is the problem. My father pulled off the road. He said, "Get out." I thought he meant to cool off, to stand outside for a minute. I had done this before, in parking lots, in driveways, the theatrical removal from the car that preceded a lecture. I got out. Curtis started laughing. My father put the car in drive. My mother did not turn around. "Let's see if she can handle it," my father said, and they drove away. I want to tell you what the first 60 seconds felt like because they are the 60 seconds everything else grew from. The first feeling was not fear. It was a strange, clarifying stillness. The kind that comes when something you have been half expecting for a long time finally arrives, and the uncertainty is replaced by the clean reality of what is actually happening. They were coming back. That was the assumption I was supposed to operate on. They were coming back in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, laughing, lesson taught, daughter suitably humble. I looked at the road. I looked at the trees. I looked at the sky, which was beginning to go orange at the edges the way Colorado skies do in the hour before dark. I made a decision. If they came back in 5 minutes, I would get in the car and say nothing and go back to the campsite and leave for Vermont in September and never look back. If they did not come back in 5 minutes, I would start walking and I would not stop and I would not call them when I reached safety and I would not come home in September. I waited exactly 5 minutes. I counted. Then I picked up my backpack and I started walking downhill. A retired couple from Kansas City picked me up 4 miles down the road. Their names were Gerald and Ruth Abbott. They were driving back to their campsite after a day trip and they saw me on the shoulder and pulled over without hesitation. Ruth asked if I was all right. I said I was. She asked if I needed a ride to town. I said yes, please. They drove me to Estes Park. Gerald offered to call someone for me. I said I was fine, thank you. I have family I can reach. This was technically true. I simply had no intention of reaching them. I found a payphone outside a gas station. I called my best friend from school, a girl named Deja, whose mother answered and who, when I explained the situation in the careful way of someone who has decided not to be dramatic about a dramatic thing, said, "Honey, you come here. Right now. You come here." Deja's mother wired me $60 through Western Union. I took a bus from Estes Park to Denver. I took another bus from Denver to Colorado Springs, where Deja's family lived. I arrived at 11:14 at night. I did not call my parents. Deja's mother, whose name was Constance Webb, sat me down at her kitchen table and asked me what I wanted to do. Not what had happened, not what my parents would think, not what the reasonable next steps were. What I wanted to do. I said, "I want to go to Vermont." She said, "Then let's figure out how to get you to Vermont." Constance Webb is the reason I believe in the specific power of one adult who sees a young person clearly at exactly the right moment. I have thought about her every year since. I have tried, in the work I do now, to be that person for someone else. My family called Deja's house 3 days after I left the mountain road. My father's voice on the answering machine was not apologetic. It was irritated. He said I had overreacted and that it was time to come home and that this was exactly the kind of behavior that proved his point. I did not call back. I finished my senior year living with Constance and Deja. I worked 20 hours a week at a coffee shop and saved every dollar. I graduated in May. I left for Vermont in August with 2 suitcases and a scholarship and the clean, terrifying freedom of someone who has cut the rope and is now entirely responsible for their own weight. Vermont was hard in the way that right things are sometimes hard. I was far from everything I knew, without a safety net, in a program that demanded more than I had been asked to give before. I almost quit in October of my freshman year. I sat in my dorm room on a Tuesday night and thought about calling my father and saying I was sorry and coming home. I did not call. I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning and went to class. That was the last time I seriously considered going back. I majored in environmental science with a concentration in outdoor education. I worked every summer, first as a trail crew member for the Forest Service in New Hampshire, then as a wilderness instructor for an outdoor program in Utah, then as a lead guide for a rafting company in Montana. I learned what I could do in physical space, in difficult conditions, with limited resources. I learned that the skills my father had taught me at 10, without meaning to give me anything lasting, had actually given me something lasting. After graduation, I took a position with a nonprofit in Asheville that ran outdoor programming for youth in the foster care system. I worked there for 4 years. I learned everything I could learn about the intersection of wilderness experience and therapeutic outcomes. I watched young people transform in the specific way that happens when you put someone who has been told they cannot handle things into an environment that requires them to handle things, and they handle them. I thought about a mountain road in Colorado every time I watched that happen. I left the nonprofit at 27 to start my own program. I had a business plan I had been writing for 2 years, a small grant from a foundation I had applied to 3 times before being accepted, and a network of professionals in the field who believed in the model. I had no family money, no cosigner, no safety net of any kind. I had Constance Webb, who flew to Asheville for my opening and cried in the parking lot, and Deja, who called every Sunday, and the specific confidence of someone who had walked 11 miles down a mountain road at 17 and understood in a way that lives in the body rather than the mind that she could handle things. The program was called Summit Forward. We took youth aged 14 to 19, most of them referred through social services, some through juvenile courts, a few through schools. We put them in the woods. We taught them to navigate, to build, to depend on themselves and on each other. We tracked outcomes for 2 years post-program. Our recidivism rate was among the lowest in the state. By year 4 we had the federal grant. By year 5 we had the 3 county partnerships. By year 6 I had a staff of 11 and a waitlist and a building I had purchased outright with program revenue and a personal investment I had been building since I was 19 years old. I did not think about my family often. That is the honest truth. Not because I had processed everything and arrived at peace exactly, but because I had built a life so full of present tense purpose that the past required active effort to access. I thought about them occasionally the way you think about a scar, aware of it when something brushes against it, otherwise simply there, incorporated, no longer the thing that defined the shape of you. They found me on a Thursday afternoon in March. My program had been featured in a regional magazine the previous fall, a 2-page spread with photographs and a description of the model and a brief profile of me as the founder. Someone had seen it. I do not know who saw it first. It does not matter. My assistant told me there was a woman on the phone who said she was my mother. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, put her through. My mother's voice was older. Of course it was. 15 years is a long time and voices carry time in them the way faces do. She said, Nadia. I said, yes. She said, we saw the article. I said, I know. A pause. She said, you look well in the photographs. I said, I am well. Another pause. The specific silence of someone who has rehearsed a conversation and has arrived to find that the other person is not following the script. She said, your father would like to speak with you. I said, I know he would. She said, will you? I thought about it. Not for long. I had thought about this version of the conversation, in the abstract, more times than I could count. I knew what I wanted from it and what I did not want and where my boundaries were. I said, I will meet with all of you, once, in person, on my terms and in my space. If that is acceptable, I will set a date. She said, yes, whatever you need. I set a date for 6 weeks out. I told her the location, my office in Asheville, on a Saturday morning. I told her there were things I was going to say and that I needed them to listen before anyone responded. I told her that if anyone became loud or dismissive or tried to reframe what happened as anything other than what it was, I would end the meeting and that would be the last conversation we ever had. She said, I understand. I said, I hope so. I will see you in 6 weeks. I hung up. I sat in my office for a few minutes, looking out the window at the tree line behind the building, at the ridge of mountains visible on clear days above the tree line. Then I went back to work. I called Deja that evening. She answered on the first ring the way she always did, as though she had been expecting it, which after 20 years of friendship she more or less always was. I told her they had found me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what do you need? That is always the right question. I have tried to teach my staff to ask it first. I said, I need to talk it through. She listened for an hour. She did not tell me what to do. She reflected back what I said with the accuracy of someone who has known you long enough to hear the difference between what you are saying and what you mean. At the end she said, you know you do not owe them anything. I said, I know. She said, and you know that meeting them does not mean forgiving them. I said, I know that too. She said, then you know what you're doing. You've always known what you're doing. I also spoke with my therapist, a woman named Dr. Carol Finch, who I had been seeing for 3 years and who had, over that time, helped me understand the difference between the wound and the scar, between the grief that needed to be processed and the anger that needed to be respected rather than resolved. She said, what is the best possible outcome of this meeting? I thought about it carefully. I said, that they understand what they did, not that they feel bad about it, not that we repair anything, just that they understand it clearly, without the story they have been telling themselves about it for 15 years. She said, that is a very precise thing to want. It is also a very achievable thing. I said, I know. That is why I agreed to the meeting. They arrived 12 minutes early, which told me they were nervous. I watched them from my office window as they parked in the lot below. My father was older in the way that large men get older. The bigness slightly softened, the certainty of his posture slightly reduced. My mother was smaller than I remembered, though I understood that was probably not physically true. Curtis had a beard now and the look of a man who had expected more from his 30s than he had received. I went downstairs and opened the door myself. My father looked at me. His face did something complicated that I did not try to interpret. He said, Nadia. I said, come in. I had set up my conference room for the meeting. 4 chairs, a table, water, nothing else. I had chosen the conference room specifically because it was my space in a way my office was not, more neutral, less personal, the space where I conducted professional conversations that required clarity. We sat down. I sat on one side. The 3 of them sat on the other. I said, I asked you to listen before responding. I am going to hold you to that. My father opened his mouth. I looked at him. He closed it. I said, on August 14th, 15 years ago, you left me on a mountain road outside Estes Park, Colorado. I was 17 years old. old. I had $43 and no cell signal. The nearest town was 11 miles away. You drove away laughing. You did not come back. I paused. I said, I have never needed you to tell me it was wrong. I knew it was wrong while I was standing on that road. What I am telling you now is what happened after. I told them about the walk, about Gerald and Ruth Abbott, about Constance Webb's kitchen table, about Vermont, about the Forest Service in Montana and the rafting company and the nonprofit and the grant I applied for 3 times. I told them about Summit Forward, about the 43 young people we served per year, about the outcomes we tracked and the lives we watched change. I told them all of it in the same tone I use when I present to funders, clear, specific, without performance. I said, I built this without you, not to prove something, because I had no alternative, and because it turned out the alternative was better than anything I would have built with you. Silence. My father's jaw was tight. Curtis was looking at the table. My mother was crying, quietly, in the way she cried, without making it the center of attention, tears simply present on her face. I said, I am not asking for an apology. I stopped needing one a long time ago. I am telling you this because you are my family and because you came here and because I think you deserve to know the truth of what your joke cost and what it accidentally gave me. My father said, his voice rougher than I remembered it, we looked for you. I said, I know. I chose not to be found. He said, we didn't know if you were safe. I said, you had an 11-mile window to turn the car around. You chose not to. He looked at the table. Something moved across his face that I had never seen there before. Not the manufactured guilt of a man performing accountability. The real thing. The specific expression of someone who has been living inside a story about themselves and has just seen it from the outside for the first time. He said, I have thought about that road every day. I said, I know. So have I. The difference is that my version ends with something I built. I hope yours ends with something too. I just cannot be responsible for what that is. Curtis said, quietly, I am sorry, Nadia. His voice was flat with the effort of saying it. I am genuinely sorry. I looked at him. I said, I believe you. My mother said, can we be part of your life? I sat with that question for a long moment. It was the question underneath all the other questions. The one the meeting had really been moving toward. I said, I don't know yet. I need you to understand that I don't know is not a no. It is the most honest answer I have. She nodded. I said, what I know is this. I am not the 17-year-old you left on that road. I am not someone who needs you or is waiting for you or has been measuring my life against yours. I built something real and it is mine and it will continue to be mine regardless of what happens in this room. If there is going to be any relationship between us, it starts from that. From me as I actually am. Not the mousy one. Not the one who never measured up. This one. My father looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were wet, which was something I had never seen in 32 years. He said, this one is more than we deserved. I said, yes, she is. I have seen my family 4 times in the 11 months since that meeting. The visits are careful and honest in the way of people learning a new language late possible, sometimes surprisingly natural, never without effort. My father does not call me mousy. He asks about my program with the specific questions of someone who has read about it and is trying to understand it. Last month, he asked if he could visit to see it in operation. I said I would think about it. I am still thinking. My mother calls on Sundays now. The calls are shorter than she would like and longer than I would have expected. We are finding the length together. Curtis sent me a message 3 months after the meeting. He said he had been in therapy for the first time and that some things had become clearer than he wanted them to be. He said he was working on it. I said, that is all any of us can do. I still run Summit Forward. We have a new cohort starting in June, 12 young people between 14 and 19, most of them referred through county social services, all of them carrying something heavy that other people handed them before they were old enough to put it down. On the first day of every cohort, I take the group to a trailhead in the Pisgah National Forest. We stand at the beginning of an 11-mile loop and I tell them we are going to walk it. All of it. Some of them look at me like I am asking the impossible. I tell them the same thing every time. I say, the only way to know what you can handle is to find out. And finding out is what we are here for. Then we start walking. If you are somewhere in America watching this, drop your state in the comments right now. And if someone in your life ever called their cruelty a joke, tell me that too. This community is full of people who walked their own version of that road. Subscribe if you have not already. Every story on this channel is worth staying for.